All right, so good afternoon, everybody. It is November the 15th, 2024, and here we are. I think this is week 7 in our Family Forward advocacy training. As I have built the Family Forward project, I have talked to people about there are basically 4 different roles you can play as an advocate. And that is you can be an organizer, which means you can kind of help bring groups together, rallies together, reach out, do posters, just try to get people organized. You can be a lobbyist, which means that you will learn how to go and talk to state legislators, especially state legislators, because they're just people, just like you and me. The congressional legislators are a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps, but your state legislators, a lot of them, although they do spend a lot of time learning about their job as a legislator, they are basically pharmacists and farmers and teachers, et cetera. So state legislative activism is a very important part of it. I also talk about another role is advocacy itself, so that you just learn to be an advocate. You learn how to help parents get their documents organized, encourage them when they go to court. We had a really good success this week in Franklin. A lot of you know Rachel, who's an advocate here in Williamson County with me and travels with me to Washington. Her and a couple other people really embraced a mom in a delicate situation, and they went to court with her yesterday and were able to get the entire case dismissed. So the other thing about state lawmaking is it also includes budget analysis. And so we just had a budget hearing for the Department of Children's Services. Just it occurred on the 6th. I was hoping I could go there live. I didn't make it, but I did watch it. And that is a presentation in and of itself. And one reason why it's so important to watch these, even though they can be boring as heck, right? Like they're so boring, but you're going to learn what the chatter is. You're going to learn what these people say to each other, what the department is telling the governor, what the department's telling his chief of staff, right? And so we had this presentation where DCS is asking for more money, asking for 187 million more dollars. And when they are doing that, all they're talking about is numbers. And oh, we have more children in this category, more children in that category. We have most of our children are being removed from Eastern Tennessee, and 15 counties is 50% of the kids. It's all numbers, numbers, numbers. And it really demonstrates to you just how detached they are from the reality of the lives that are being affected. So they're asking for about 60% of their budget is going to be an increase in foster care and more money for foster homes. And then I think it was about 14%, 17% was for rehabilitation. And then there was caseload increase. So what is going on at the state level is so important. And wherever you are, this happens to be, I think that's Iowa, actually. I went up there. We had a presentation up there. But wherever you are, you need to learn something about your states. All of these states operate differently as far as their agencies are concerned. Some of them are county agencies, some of them are state agency. I was talking to my friend Terry in Alabama the other day, and she's like, "Oh, I was told that the state doesn't have any control over the county." So we got together and we dug around, and sure enough, there was a code, a law that was made by the state General Assembly or state legislature that said that their agencies would be county agencies. So it's very important that we know this. I mean, ultimately, if I can have the opportunity to participate in the administration, one of the things that has to be looked at is how every state does this differently and whether it's good or bad, and some common core legislation, some uniform codes, et cetera, so that it's functioning the same way in Ohio as it is in Florida, as it is in Tennessee, as it is in California. All right, so getting prepared to lobby for state law changes. So let me move my thing over here just a bit. All right, so the state legislators control the purse strings or the budget of the government agencies and are able to write laws that govern them. A few are lawyers, but many of them are not, and they are influenced by political contributions and voter groups. So you have to know who is just like if you've been watching and watching this training, one of the things I talk about a lot is who has the power to make decisions and who is influencing decisions. So we have, whenever you go to state legislation, and this is more and more and more. I mean, I could probably do trainings every Friday until the day I die because there's so much information I want to give you. But you also need to understand who these legislators are and what they do for a living, and who are making contributions to them, and who's helping them campaign, what their history is, if they have relationships with other legislators, etc. So, I mean, I started in 2008, just basically going down to the Tennessee General Assembly and walking the halls, like just fresh, I mean, and keep in mind, I was not like I was just out of college. I mean, I'd already been practicing law for nearly 20 years. And I just went down and knocked on their doors and said, can I make an appointment, or do you have a few minutes? And they're like, what are you here for? I'm like, I just want to talk about judicial accountability. But even with that, I was able to raise enough concerns to make something happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but I am going to promise you that just going down there, making your face available, making them see you, and see you more than once and more often. And I would love for people to say, yeah, you know what? I want to do that. I want to be the voice of the people at our state legislature, and just create a whole posse of people across all 50 states to do that. All right, so the state government, again, basic, this is basic first training on this. Most of you are going to know it. I'm sorry if I insult your intelligence, but as you know, we have three branches of government at the federal and the state level. So amazingly, you'd be surprised about how many people don't know this. And even the fact that we're supposed to have separation of powers, we have a lot of people in these branches of government that don't mind their own business and end up crossing over from one branch to another. So the executive branch is the governor and all of his agencies and commissions. So let's take the state of Tennessee, for instance. Tennessee has 40 different agencies and 280 commissions. Okay, so if you go to the Blue Book and you can flip page after page after page after page and seeing all these commissions. So, I mean, truly, it's the government's job when they get in office. They're supposed to be appointing all of these people to serve on all of these commissions and boards, and then appointing the people to head up these state agencies. Now, just like in Washington, D.C., these state agencies are also filled with bureaucrat employees that don't want their job to change and don't want their duties to change and want to just sit tight until they can get that big fat state pension at the end of the day. So the executive branch is burdened by bureaucracy. The judicial branch and Supreme Court is the Supreme Court and all of the lower courts, which is good and bad. We're going to talk about the interaction between the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch in a moment. But most of you who are doing our kind of training have dealt with the judicial branch. You have an idea of what's happening there, and it's not pretty. And then, of course, the legislative branch are elected officials. There are representatives and senators. And at the state level, these are all part-time. So these are people who have other careers. Some of them are retired from their fields. We have several of those in the state of Tennessee. But they are people generally who have either a job or a business. Now, keep in mind, it is a sacrifice to serve as a state legislator when you're only part-time, and you have to take away from your business. You have January, February, March, and April, at least 4 months of every year that you have to dedicate to the government. They do get a paycheck. It's not very much. Of course, they do get state benefits, which there's a lot to be said for state benefits, such as health care. But it is, when we talk to them, we need to provide them a certain amount of respect that they do dedicate some hard work and a lot of time to their state legislative functions. All right, the state capitol buildings, every state has a capitol building. That's TOL for those of you who are like, oh, there's a TAL and a TOL. So every state has a Capitol building, and it will generally house the office of the governor and his staff. The Capitol may include the assembly rooms for the legislators. It is unlikely that the offices of the legislators will be in the Capitol, but they should be somewhere close by. So you're going to have a Capitol building, and you're going to have some type of a legislative plaza, a legislative assembly building, etc. Most of the time, they're going to be right next to each other because the Capitol building will generally hold the let's see, what do we call it? Where they meet, right? Where they all meet together, the floor, right? It has the Senate floor, it has the House floor, and where they can also meet together. So the state legislature has two houses, like federal congressmen and senators. Every state has two houses in the legislative branch, except for Nebraska. Nebraska is the only state that has a one lawmaking body, and it's called the unicameral system. I don't know enough people in Nebraska to know how they feel about that or how it's working. There is, as I can see, certain advantages to that because when you have two different houses, a lot of times what you'll have, and we're going to talk about having to have a bill sponsored in both the House and the Senate, but sometimes you'll have a House bill and the Senate just won't agree with it, or they want to make drastic changes to it. It just creates another layer of chaos. The legislators are elected, and generally representatives have election every 2 years and senators every 6 years, which is very similar, which is the same as our federal. So our federal House of Representatives, our congressmen have to run every 2 years, and our senators every 6 years. And those 6 years are on an alternating schedule so that all the senators are not running every year. So every 2 years, there's 1/3 of the senators are going to have to run. They are part-time. They start in January and end in about April. However, the governor can also call special sessions if they want. So every legislative body has committees in both the House and the Senate. The committee organization, so sadly, the committee names do not match in the Senate and the House, so you kind of have to find out what subjects the committees cover. We run into the same thing in Washington. So we may be talking to the Ways and Means Committee in Congress, and then we find out we have to go to the Finance Committee in the Senate. So you have to kind of figure out where they line up to cover any certain bill that you want to propose. Membership. Each committee will have a number of members that are typically selected by the lieutenant governor. Sometimes the Speaker of the House will do this for the House of Representatives. And this is a very interesting, there's a very interesting method here. The legislators don't have total control of what committees are going to serve on. Now, they do get to state their preferences for sure, which is a good thing, but they don't have total control of those committees. And then the chair, every committee is going to have a chair, and they basically run the show. They can kick bills off. They can, they can take a bill off notice. I mean, a committee chair can block a whole bill just because they're the committee chair. They can control how long the time is for comments. I mean, they have what I call way too much control. All right, so every single person is going to have a senator and a representative. Now, this little tip, this note down here in the corner, most states have an interactive website where you can type in your address and find your representatives. And you should, on their profile, there's the best place to start to understand who they are. Who is this person that's representing me? So you type in your address. Let's say you're in Kentucky and you get this name of this representative, and you go to his page within the General Assembly website. I think in they may even call it not the cabinet. No, I'm not sure. Some states call it something a little bit different, but you can read who, if they're married, if they have children, what church they go to is usually on there, what their current employment status is. I mean, you can learn a lot just by looking at their profile on the website. So for every family that we know that are affected by the system, they need to look up the name and contact their legislators. We just have to bug them to death. So, the tip down here is when you identify a victim in the system, uh, their contact information, including their address, so that we can locate who their legislators are. And almost every legislator has an email address on their website as well. Now, you're going to go like, well, do they check them? Well, they do pay for assistants. They do have full-time assistants that do pull those emails.
What?
So we do want to engage with them and have some communication with them. Somebody here might need to mute. Okay. All right, you need to locate both the House and Senate committees that reviews the laws on foster care in the CPS agency. So this may not be the same committee that reviews the laws for divorce and custody. You have to look at the committee calendars and see what kind of laws are popping up. So for instance, we have a Children and Families House Committee, but we do not have a Children and Families Senate committee. So in the Senate, it's either going to be in civil justice, criminal justice, finance, or government operations. So you need to kind of, and again, on these websites, you can find the bills and you can see what committees the bills are assigned to. And you can even search bills by category. For instance, in Tennessee, I can go to the General Assembly website and they have search bills by subject. I can type in children or I can type in Department of Children's Services and I can go get a whole list of those bills and then you can click on them and you can learn more and more. And actually, it would be great to have a team so that as the bills begin to get filed at the beginning of the session, there's a place where it's called an index. And the index just pops up with a number, and then you click on that number and you have to go look at what the bill is. But I was doing some grassroots work with one organization, and we were creating a spreadsheet on those bills right as they popped up so that we could track them. All right, so if you decide you have a law that you want passed, you have, here's your first challenge. The first challenge is that you have to have two sponsors. You have to have a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor, and you have to have an empathetic legislator. So if the sponsor doesn't understand the problem, they cannot present the bill to committee. And an advocate needs to educate the legislator. I'm going to give you an example. I wanted a family advocate bill in the state of Tennessee, and I had a great legislator who was wonderful working with me. She was so empathetic. She was so kind. She believed everything I said. She was a big fan, a big supporter of mine, but she didn't really understand how the system worked and how this would really work. And she wasn't really prepared to be able to answer questions because of that. Now she was able to, you know, allow me, and of course this was a few years ago before we had all the public comments, but I would have been able to cover all those gaps for her had we had public comments. But again, getting back to the committee, the chair of committee took her bill off notice, which means that we couldn't even get it to the floor for a vote. So we have to have, though, an empathetic legislator, even if we have to educate them, and we need sponsors in both the House and the Senate. And it may not be your person, by the way. It may be maybe somebody that's not in your area, but just is very empathetic about the issue or has some special concern. All right, so speaking tips, start. So if you feel like you're going to be nervous speaking, somebody taught me this trick a long time ago, and it actually works very, very well. So you start at the number 10 and you count backwards to 5. So you go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 5, 5. And you just listen to the tone of your voice when you say the number 5. And that's the tone of voice that you should use when you speak to a legislator asking for help. So again, when you do that, you start 10, go to backwards to 5. Just the tone of the word 5, honestly, has a very solid tone to it. and it gets some of that tension out of your voice if you count backwards down to that number. So that's just a tip for training so that you can start to train yourself on how to be a good speaker in these situations. So you also want to prepare for your meeting. So you are going to contact a legislator by phone or email, request a meeting regarding CPS reform or DCS reform or whatever the agency is in your state. And it can either be your personal legislator or somebody who's been identified as empathetic to the issue. So how do you find these leaders who have some empathy to it? Well, unfortunately, Google and AI have presented us with some great tools that, for instance, Alabama, I could Google the parental rights bill in Alabama, and I would get a link somewhere in the list of Google results of the actual bill. And then I could go to that bill, I could click on it, and I could find out who the sponsor is. So that's one way to do it. Or let's say I want to go to Oklahoma state laws on disability rights. Okay. So I would just start Googling and find some of those laws. Or the other way to do it is to go into the legislature. Now, that would be to look for past laws, right? If you want to just look currently, maybe they have something currently going on. You would go to the legislative website and under the search by subject, type in disability, children's rights, etc. So you just have to do some research and start finding out what's going on. I mean, we have more and more media now. We actually finally we have state legislators who want to be more publicly active. This is relatively new. I would say within the last 2 or 3 years because of all the social media. And I really think with this election, I think the one thing that this election proved is that social media is the presence of the people. And it's your opportunity for that to be your forum to have a voice. And now more and more legislators are recognizing that as well. So in the meeting, your very first meeting with a legislator is critical. First impressions, right? It sets the relationship. You want to thank them for their time. You want to have your presentation somewhat outlined. You want to have rehearsed it, talked about it to yourself in the mirror, with our own recording devices on our phones. Set up your phone and talk to your phone about it, and then listen to it and listen to how you speak. It's so important to hear yourself speak. How do you talk? Know what you're asking for, raise awareness with statistics and stories. And personal stories, of course, should be reduced to somewhere around 3 minutes so that they can get an understanding of how important this issue is to you because of a personal story, either your own or somebody that you know about personally. The state legislator will need to feel a personal connection to listen to you, know about their background, the demographics, their district, identify how the issue might be relevant to them. So I'm a big power of positive thinking kind of person. And when I go in to meet a legislator, I want to immediately, these legislators are going to have frontline people, right? In Tennessee, they have one aide generally or one secretary. When we go to Washington, they probably have, they have a few people sitting at the front desk. They have, 4 or 5 people that seem to be walking through the office. You're not sure who's who, but always make sure you're kind and friendly and positive and upbeat to them. I'm a people person. I was in the restaurant business for years. I'm a meter greeter kind of person. So that is all comes fairly natural to me. I love to say hello to people. I love to start a conversation with them, especially if I'm there for a purpose. Now, I'll say if I'm just out at the grocery store or something, I'm probably not good at it at all and should be better. But, I try to be more positive about that, even with, oh, somebody's trying to call me there, even with people I'm meeting for the first time. Practice it, be positive, have a positive glow on your face, smile, look at them, look them in the eyes, etc. And if you are kind to their secretaries are going to help you. They're going to help you. They're going to take your phone calls. They're going to take messages. They're going to call you back if something changes. So you want the secretaries to be your next best friend. So I will tell you flat out that state legislators generally have an overrated assessment of judicial competence. They believe legislators assume that judges follow the law, and they assume that the courts are fair tribunals, and their perception is often inaccurate. All right, so this is so true. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen them putting together a law, and I don't know, let's say it's a law as to whether or not the Department of Children's Services can get medical treatment for a child if the child is in DCS custody. And, they'll say, the conservative people will say, no, well, the parents have to consent. And then they'll go, yeah, the parents have to consent. And then somebody throws in there, well, unless there's a court order, unless the judge decides otherwise. Every time they say that, I just cringe. A lot of that came up in the parental rights bill, but it is, they just have a way, their assessment of the judiciary and how they are participating in people's lives is just way overrated. All right, so you need to understand how your bill fits in. And so, how does your bill fit in to the country? Legislators do want to know if any other state has this law. I find that very interesting that they ask that question. Excuse me just a second. Got a little afternoon gargly thing in my throat there. State legislators want to know, has any other state passed this law, or how does this law affect other laws? And if the committee chair supports the bill, or if CPS supports the bill, or if stakeholders have reviewed the bill. Now, to me, I always tell them stakeholders are parents. They think stakeholders are organizations and private contractors and, other people who have a stakeholder who benefit from a chaotic and corrupt system, but these are things they're going to want to know. So this is where national coordination and policy becomes a critical and requires research. So ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and NSLC is the National State Legislative Council. So ALEC is supposed to be the right-wing conservative part, and the NSLC is supposed to be the left-wing, more liberal part. And they make recommendations for certain legislative policies every single year. Very expensive to belong to these organizations. I was going to join one of them, and it was like $4,500 just to have a membership. So I said, no way. But they do have annual conferences. They do discuss things. They do have topics. They both have websites. You can go to their websites. There have been some things on their website. ALEC was the first one to put up on their website the parental rights bill, which I don't like, but it was only put up there because it was pushed by another nonprofit agency. So when you want to look at what other states have done, sometimes it helps you, sometimes it does not. For instance, the state of Texas did this second opinion bill. I took the exact bill that passed by Texas to a Tennessee legislator, and honestly, they just didn't even understand it. It was just way too sophisticated for them. So, but they're going to want to know that how this law affects other laws. I'll tell you, I took a bill in and I said, look, I want you to create a law that says that these cases have to be adjudicated within 6 months. And then, the CPS comes in and says, well, we already have a law. It says 90 days. And I says, yeah, they have a rule that says 90 days. They don't have a law. And so therefore we need a law because they're not following their own rules. And it got defeated. They wouldn't pass it because of that. So, understanding the financial influence in CPS reform, the state budget, the private contractors, the lobbyists, and the fiscal notes. So, access to information, you can pull the state budgets, you can pull private contractor dollars, and you can pull lobbyist money. And these are just things you're going to have to know as part of this process because the question is going to be how much money will your bill cost the taxpayers? So they have this thing called a fiscal note. So what a fiscal note is, the fiscal note is where after a bill gets introduced to the floor, they send it to fiscal, right? They send it to the treasurer's office. And the treasurer's office, the Department of Finance, sits down, looks at the bill, decides whether or not this bill is going to create any additional tax spending, and then they create this report. It's way off base most of the time. It's like if they want a bill to pass, it has like 0. And if they don't want a bill to pass, they put like a huge budget on it. Back in 2008, I asked for video and or audio recording in every courtroom. And everybody's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then they sent it to fiscal, and fiscal sent back it was going to cost like some ridiculous amount, like $2 or $3 million, even though all the courtrooms are already wired for security cameras. And so they were able to crush it. So fiscal is how they crush a bill. And if they want a bill to pass, they just pretend like it's not going to cost any money, although everything costs money. So the foster program is a failure. It's a social experiment of fostering children has failed. Children who have been in the system, if you're with me on this, you've seen me talk about this many times, but they are more likely to go to prison. They're not as successful in society generally, and there are social failures. They're more likely to have children out of wedlock, not complete high school or college, suffer from addiction, and be re-victimized by the system. So state legislators need to know this. Right now, the narrative is foster care is such a wonderful thing. We need more foster parents. We got to get these children protected by these good homes, right? But there's no panacea about a foster parent. There's nothing that they don't have. They have 30 hours of training to be a foster parent. But overall, we know that the system of foster care is a failed social experiment, and you need to speak that loud and clear when you talk to legislators. All right, the milestones in child welfare, of course, in 1974 was CAPTA and the Mondale Act. That's the federal legislation that passed the tax dollars. And from 1997 thereafter, we've had law after law after law after law. And if you watched one of the earlier trainings called the trauma drama, I went through some of these laws. I have not covered all of them for you, but just so that you know, it's not that it's gone unnoticed. Almost every year, once in a while, there's a skipped year, but almost every year, Congress passes some law, because this is federal legislation we're talking about here now, but Congress will pass some law that does something. You generally cost more money, but with all of those laws, they have continued to have failures. In February 2018, we were able to get the Families First and Services Act passed, but only 21 states have basically enacted family first legislation. This is something else, though. I'll tell you, most of these state legislators do not understand the child welfare funding and the federal laws. So if you can verse yourself in that at all, you are way ahead of them. And I've actually had state legislators look at me and say, oh, you're a wealth of information, aren't you? Yeah, they don't know. So the Family First Act was February 2018. It was first called the Families First Prevention and Services Act. The principles of the bill were to have services for 12 months prior to removal, that relative kinship. They created what was called a kinship navigator to eliminate group homes and to provide services for foster care pregnancies. So the state plans, as of July 2022, only 21 states had officially adopted a Family First plan. I haven't checked the website to see if it's been updated since then, but there is a link there, the link to the federal website. I'm not going to click on it because it'll mess up my whole slideshow, but there is a link that will tell you what states have. Now, I'll tell you about Tennessee here in a minute, though we'll come back to that. The state legislators will likely not understand the link between federal funding, state agency, and complying with the federal laws. For years, the Title IV-E required foster care. So, I mean, decades and decades, and they still didn't even really understand that. They don't understand that there's this whole other section of funds called Other that's incorporated into their budget that is still taxpayer dollars. Again, most of that is federal dollars. All right, so the Family First state plans, the Family First plans are intended to, let me get back over here, intended to reduce unnecessary separation, to restore compromised families, and maintain generational integrity. All right, so let somebody in over here. That was why we had Family First state plans. This was distinctly different from the Title IV-E state plans, which was the inspiration of putting more and more children in foster care. So here we go. When I pulled this up in 2022 and first created this slideshow, you can see that these are the states. The states with the red dot were the ones that had approved plans. All right. Now, I think since then, Tennessee was marked as an approved plan because I did go in at one point and click the link to Tennessee, which it basically was not an approved plan at all. It was their policy they'd had for many years. And although they did add a paragraph about prevention services. So if you might, whatever state you're in, you might want to go to that website and pull up your state, and let's take a look at it and see what they're saying is their Family First plan. So the balance of influence, every governor of every state has an army of lobbyists. Okay, they will meet in secret, demonize your efforts, lobby against you, talk about how much smarter they are than you, and know that you will meet a host of opposition from the governor's office to the state agencies by paid lobbyists paid by the own taxpayers, supporting the monetization of children and all the way to the Bar Association. So as I flash back and talk to you again about that slide about the three branches of government, I hate that the governor can lobby for laws and lobby for changes. That should not be the job of the governor. It should not be paid for by the taxpayers for the executive branch to lobby the legislative branch to influence the judicial branch. That just should not be allowed to happen. But I'm going to tell you, it happens. Tennessee's governor has 40 different lobbyists, and they go and they have what they call a governor's package of legislation. And they go to the big guys. They go to the leader of the Senate. They go to the leader of the House. They go to the lieutenant governor, and they're like, these are the governor's bills that we want passed. And they just like push them through like crazy. So again, that's another thing that we have to be vocal about. We need to tell these state legislators, you do not need to be influenced by the governor. You need to be influenced by the people and what the needs of your own community are. So when you think about a particular bill, you want to, in your mind, decide what the topic of the bill is going to be. What is this bill? Is it a due process rights bill? Is it a family rights bill? It is a rehabilitation bill. So, for instance, I tried to do away with anonymous reporting, which I think is a due process issue. And so you kind of get in your mind sort of that category because that's going to help you sort of navigate through what committee. It's going to help you sort of solidify the arguments that you put together. So be ready to express the contents of your proposed bill in terms of the topic. The legislators hear topics and they will prepare their mind for, what do I have up there? Hang on here. Discussion. All right. So today, in today's world, and I hadn't used it, I don't think, before I first put this together in 2022, but now, of course, we have ChatGPT. And so if you download ChatGPT, you can actually tell Chat to draft me legislation on what disability rights a parent should have in a termination of parental rights proceeding, okay? And it will draft you some legislation. Now, it's not going to stop there. I'm going to tell you, don't do that and then think you have a done deal, because I have done this several times, and every time I download it and I tweak it, I proof it, I read it, I change it, I want it to look good. So you can use a artificial intelligence to help you draft a proposed legislation. So another category might be family rights. Like I talked about before, should a state agency be able to give medical care, vaccinations to children in the foster care? Should the DCS be able to ship children out of state once they're in DCS custody? This is a topic that's coming up because honestly, the law, the way it's written, they have all kinds of power. They can, even some of it says they can't give vaccinations, but then it says unless there's a court order, all they have to do is ask for a court order. The other thing, of course, is rehabilitation. We need new and better laws on rehabilitation. How do we rehabilitate a family? What kind of laws do we need in place? I think the state should be providing long-term substance abuse rehabilitation if they're taking a child for substance abuse. It certainly would be cheaper to put a parent in a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day rehabilitation program with a plan for reunification once they have accomplished that than to keep their child for 4 or 5 years and then adopt the child out and then get all that entitlement money on top of that. All right, so also when you're putting together this proposal, think about the problem. What is the problem? That's another thing you can tell Chat GPT. You can say, so there's a problem with ex parte orders where the state agency is taking children with ex parte orders without doing an investigation on their referrals. Help me draft legislation that will either remove ex parte orders or drastically limit them, and it will help you do that. Relative placement is another one. Although we have a law for relative placement, of course, it's ignored. So, of course, it needs to be tightened up, right? And then aggressive removals, children who are removed when there really has not been an investigation or there's not really an emergency situation. Be ready to describe the problem in terms of practice and policy used by the agency and their overzealous separation practices. So you should understand the lingo of the agency. And we're going to do one on acronyms. We're going to talk about acronyms. Now, most legislators are not going to know acronyms, so it's not going to be extremely helpful to you to use acronyms with them. But the state agency is going to use acronyms as well. So you're going to want to know enough about the policy to be able to combat, for instance, if they say, well, we already have a policy for that. All right, now how does the bill solve the problem? So in a due process, it might be the right to be heard for relative placement, the rights of relatives, and also to prevent separation. So you kind of want to understand what is the problem, what is the policy, and what do we need to do about it, and how is that going to help solve the problem? All right, so from outsider to influencer, this is the goal here. So how do you go from just being an outsider in the state legislative process to be somebody who is an influencer? Well, it's practice, practice, practice. It's prepare, 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 and it is be present and be willing to participate. Okay, so go to the hearings. There from January to April is the state legislation. You need to look at your calendar now. Usually the most important days are Tuesdays and Wednesdays to be able to go there, sit in the committee hearings, take notes of who's there, go by the offices, make an appointment with them, even if it's over a present bill. Or if you just hear them say something like super, really stupid in a hearing, make an appointment and go by and say, look, I just want you to know, I'm helping the public understand what's going on here. And you said this in committee, and I really would like for you to reconsider that. So we've got to be the influencers. We've got to stop sitting on the sidelines. So Family Forward has a wealth of knowledge and significant public support. So when I am in Washington, I always introduce ourselves as we're with the Family Forward Project, which is a grassroots organization of 19,000 families across the United States who are working on child welfare reform. You can use that. They want to know numbers or dollars. And if you don't have money to give them, then use your numbers because we do have a voice. We do have, when I first started in 2008, they either wanted to know how many votes they could get out of me or how much money they could get out of me. So use the public support of Family Forward. We have helped some people get in office just by identifying them, talking to them. So go from outsider to influencer. All right, so identify the movement behind CPS reform and the classes of people affected, grandparents, the poor, the addicts, etc., and connect CPS reform to national issues. Of course, I mean, right now, CPS reform is affecting so many things. For instance, in California, they're taking children away because the parents are not promoting LGBTQ. And then I just saw, I can't even remember what state it flashed up, where a father was granted custody of a child because he did not agree with the LGBTQ in his state. He was granted full custody because the mother was trying to do a gender transformation on the child. So know that these issues cross the boundaries. They cross sports, they cross gender issues, they cross racial issues, and of course, they cross funding issues. Explain the data on the failure of the system, foster fail, prison, reentry into the system, A lot of people re-enter the system, trafficking, statistics on missing children. These will be all some separate trainings that we do. So Family Forward Project has over 17,000 members. Family Forward Project has met with state and federal legislators, and Family Forward Project is developing family policy. So you can use it if you need it and just say, hey, I'm working with Family Forward Project. We're all over the country now, and it's particularly people who are concerned about this system. Okay, so this is a real live legislative session regarding trying to get the parental rights bill passed. Now, I think it's 20 or 25 minutes. We may not watch the whole thing, but I was going to just clip out my speech. But I think it's important more to see the process, because you need to immerse yourself into it and see what's happening in this process. So, Chad, I can still see you in the image. So when I start this video, would you give me a thumbs up if you can also hear the audio?
With y'all today. Madam Chair, there is an amendment that writes the bill and several people who would like to testify on the bill. How would you like to proceed? You want to?
Let's put the amendment on, please.
Okay. I have a draft.
Okay, is it too low? It's too low. All right, I'm not sure if I can affect that, because I don't think my volume is going to affect it, and it looks like it's all the way up here. Oh, darn it, it would be.
Which is what I just did.
You what?
We can all turn our volumes up if it's too low.
Okay, y'all turn your volume up. Let's go ahead.
Code 4446.
Okay. Okay, properly motion and second. Let's go ahead and put it on. All those in favor of adding Amendment 14446 to House Bill 2936, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. You are recognized on House Bill 2936 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, last year I was in conversations with some friends about the importance of the family and parents, that I have felt like I see society kind of eroding some of the importance of the nuclear family, parents being involved in children. I've seen some of that, society kind of eroding that. As I started to look into it, I talked to people, come to find out that Tennessee is not really known for enshrining in law the importance of the family, such as parental rights are involved. The more I dug into it, the more I thought there are ways that we could strengthen our code, our Tennessee code, and put more emphasis on the family and the importance of parental rights. With that being said, I know there are people here for the bill and against the bill, and if it's good with you, I'll step away and let people talk on the bill.
Without objection, we're going to go out of session, and we're going to ask Ms. Connie Reguli to come forward and state your name and who you're with, please. And you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, committee and chairwoman. My name is Connie. Family Forward Project. I stood in courts across the state for 3 decades, helping families weave through complex legal challenges. I'm here to oppose 2936 as written, the Families' Rights and Responsibilities Act, and any legislation that attempts to enumerate parental rights and then provides that the government can slice and dice those rights away without meeting the constitutional burden that a parent must be proven unfit by clear and convincing evidence before the government can intervene. The bill has 2 sections, one creating an entirely new code section, and the second buries rights and exceptions in Title 63, the Health Care Code. First, definitions. The bill defines a parent to include an individual who's been granted decision-making authority over the child under state law. Decision-making means power granted to a non-parent. I assume this was intended for legal guardians. However, a guardian is not a parent. By statute, they are granted enumerated decision-making authority in a court order, and their rights are limited by that court order. Second, the bill goes on to outline all of the exceptions to parental rights. The word unless is used 5 times. And then the slippery slope section of when this does not apply includes that a parent gives a blanket consent or, quote, a government entity or any other person reasonably relies in good faith on an individual's representations that the individual is the parent of a minor or has otherwise been granted authority to make decisions regarding a minor's care under state law, which can roughly be translated in layman's terms as to, oops, that person told me it was okay. And then there is this exception, meaning that there's no parental rights, quote, services provided to or information is received or maintained about a minor enrolled in an institution of higher education or a minor participating in a program for which the minor's parent has consented to the child's participation by an employee of the institution of higher education or other school official, which basically means there's no parental rights if a college is involved. The section under Title 63 includes a whole new exception to health care decisions. Here, a person includes, quote, a corporation or any legal entity or commercial entity, whether or not a citizen or domiciliary of this state, whether or not organized under the laws of this state. And parental rights do not apply when, quote, a person participates or assists in emergency care. This is not a bill for parental rights. This is a bill of parental bondage. With all due respect to the sponsor, the bill has too many slippery exceptions to protect parental rights and protect children at the same time.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Representative Harris, you're recognized.
First question is, are we still in quorum? Because we've got a lot of people that just walked out.
We're out of session.
Okay, I just want to make sure before I be able to ask. So thank you for being here. And so for the purposes of this, I mean, it is fairly long. But going back to what it is that you just mentioned, what are the points that you think that are harmful to a parent or the parent's rights?
Yeah, so
You're recognized.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. I want to particularly look at this whole unless section about when a parent loses its rights. There's a whole section about law enforcement, forensic interviews, court proceedings, safety demonstrations. One of the big problems is in that section, there's no level of the standard that would need to be present before there was that state intervention. For instance, if a child is going to be forced to engage in a forensic interview or a law enforcement interview, there should be some credible evidence of probable cause of a crime or imminent threat. So, in other words, this just gives us blanket authority without saying that they have to have cause to do it, at least some type of probable cause. The other thing in particular, it talks about forensic interviews with children, and I think that children, it doesn't really provide that children should then have, and the family should have some protection of the child having an attorney or neutral person present while they're being interviewed in a forensic setting, because this could be anything from a 3-year-old to a 17-year-old. And then under the exceptions of academic, where basically consent is not required, it includes academic, extracurricular, et cetera, photo identification cards, things like that. Those clearly need to be with the consent of the parent, especially these days when we know that electronic imagery can go anywhere. That would help.
Representative Harris, you good? Any other questions? If not, thank you for being here.
Thank you, thank you.
Next, we're going to call up Mr. Jordan Carpenter. If you would come forward and state your name and who you're with for the record, please. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to the members of the subcommittee. My name is Jordan Carpenter. I serve as legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. ADF is the world's largest nonprofit legal organization committed to protecting the rights of parents to raise their children without undue government interference. We're committed to this cause because children belong first and foremost to their families. Over 100 years ago, the Tennessee Supreme Court held that the relations which exist between parent and child are sacred, and that parents can't be deprived of the rights that correspond with those relations without notice and upon some ground which affects materially the future of the child. House Bill 2936 provides clear standards in support of these sacred relations between parent and child by defining the right of a parent to direct the upbringing, education, and care of that parent's child, declaring that right to be fundamental, which means that government interference with the right gets the highest level of scrutiny, and providing a legal remedy for parents whose rights have been violated. Because it is fundamental, the right of fit parents to bring up their children as they choose should receive top-tier protection from all levels of government. But ADF represents and has represented parents in Wisconsin, Michigan, Virginia, and other places where government officials have hid information, lied to parents, or otherwise interfered with the realm of authority that rightly belongs with the family. And while Tennessee has a historically strong record of protecting individual liberties, the state lags behind the 17 other states that have codified the fundamental right of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children. Passing House Bill 2936 would put parental rights at the top of the priority list in Tennessee. Because parents know and love their children best, the government's role should be to defer to parents except in extraordinary cases. In 2013, the Tennessee Supreme Court reaffirmed its commitment to parental rights when it said, "A parent's right to the care and custody of his or her child is among the oldest of the judicially recognized liberty interests." By passing House Bill 2936, the General Assembly can do its part to prioritize and protect parental rights in Tennessee. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Harris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So with that, what about the kids that would be in DCS custody?
Mr. Carpenter.
Representative, that's always the question, right? The government has a role to protect the rights of parents. It also has a role in protecting the safety and well-being of children. That is a foremost consideration, and that's what these standards are for. That's why the balancing test, that's why some of the exceptions that the previous witness talked about exist in the bill as drafted, because there's always a balancing act between the rights of parents and the responsibility of the government to ensure that children are not abused or neglected.
Representative Harris.
So if a child who has, been in a situation where they may have been neglected in some form, reading this, unless there's somewhere else that I'm not reading, based off of it, it looks like the parent will still have the full rights as far as like the moral and religious training for the child and to direct the upbringing of the child, even if DCS has custody of that child.
Mr. Carpenter.
No, and I think that's where we talk about unless otherwise provided by law or court order. And there are plenty of places in the Tennessee Code where already parents' rights are infringed on based on circumstances relating to the child and preventing things such as child abuse or neglect. Now, it's kind of baked into the system that those things have been built based on the standards that this bill would codify, which is there's a compelling governmental interest and the government's actions are narrowly tailored to serve that compelling interest. So, as an example, there's a compelling governmental interest for Tennessee to prevent or address child abuse and neglect. It will use the means that it has through the court system, through other government activities to address that. Now it just has to tailor those activities and those policies to make sure that it's serving the interest and not doing something else or otherwise unduly interfering with the parent's right.
Representative.
So from a DCS standpoint, if a child is in this situation here where we'll have one law that says that they have the rights to all these parental rights, but then we'll have other laws. So basically, a child will be in a court battle going back and forth because one party is going to sue DCS, and then DCS is going to be taking the parent to court, vice versa, based off of this legislation. So we're just going to have just open cases just going back and forth.
Mr. Carpenter.
No, I think this bill simply codifies what already exists at common law throughout the state and federal court systems. So the interactions with the state that parents already have through DCS or child welfare cases within the custody battles, all of these standards are already built in. And so they can make those arguments in court already. But this provides an avenue for parents who feel like their rights have been violated. Maybe there's not already a case pending against them. Provides them access to address those violations in a way where clear standards are set and parental rights are prioritized in this state.
Representative.
So I guess my last question is, and I was talking about this earlier, but the parent still has these rights until the court rules otherwise, in a lot of cases. And here, I'll use, for example, on number 8 says that the parent has the right to participate in parent-teacher association and school organizations that are sanctioned by the Board of Education of a local education agency. So I still, even though my child is currently under custody with DCS, I'll still have the right, because of this law, to be able to go to parent-teacher conferences, to do all the stuff I would like to do with my child, even though my child is technically in the custody of the state.
Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, the many of the enumerated rights here, it's the consensus view of what the parent's right to direct the education of the child, for example, is. So the right to direct education is the right to choose the setting where your child is educated, to participate in the academic process, and to make reasonable choices within the curriculum setting. So those things are already in the system. They already have case law that support those things. This is simply laying it out in the Tennessee Code to say the legislative branch is not only endorsing this, but saying this is what we want to be the public policy of Tennessee, not subject to judicial interpretation.
I don't have anything else, but I do think that this will probably cause some headache for DCS for sure. I don't know if they're speaking on this, but definitely would have some questions for them if they're not.
Representative Bricken, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and those are awfully good questions. So, background, what organization again are you with?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, sir. I work for Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm an attorney.
Okay. So ADF is your acronym, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are y'all the source for this legislation?
Mr. Carpenter.
The source of the legislation is obviously with the sponsor. I have worked with the sponsor to ensure that we work within the function, the structure, even the syntax of the Tennessee Code, that it doesn't conflict with laws as they currently exist. So I wouldn't say we're the source, but we definitely have worked with the sponsor.
What,
Representative Bricken.
thank you, Madam Chairman. You mentioned 17 states. Have they passed similar legislation as being proposed?
Madam Chair.
You're recognized.
Yes, sir. So 17 states have codified and used the words that the right of a parent to direct the upbringing, education, and care of that parent's child is a fundamental right.
No, and that's not a
Representative
question.
Bricken.
Thank you. Has 17 states passed legislation directly like this? And almost, is this a uniform type of legislation that your organization is sponsoring across the nation?
Mr. Carpenter.
It is substantially similar to those other 17 states. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Representative Bricken.
And when was the earliest of that legislation enacted in any other state?
Mr. Carpenter.
Many of the states have had statutory language that's substantially similar to this on the books for decades. Colorado is a good example. Even West Virginia has a statute that harkens back to 1870. So there are some statutes on the book. A lot of the parental rights litigation arose in the 80s and 90s when states were passing grandparent visitation laws or other things that infringed on the rights of parents. That's when a lot of the lawsuits dealing with this issue. And then since I'd say the 90s, states have considered this type of legislation. I'd say the bulk of those 17 states have passed their legislation in the last decade.
Okay.
Representative Bricken.
That's kind of, I mean, I kind of wanted to get a little bit of the historical possible background of this type of legislation, because I'm going to say, as well-meaning as this is, I think we all want to certainly support the family rights and rights of parents, it's just hard for me, I'm going to say, to believe that we can cover all the issues in legislation, and therefore we will be continually adding to this or striking from this as we go forward, which may be what we're supposed to do up here. It just seems, I just don't know how we codify everything under the parental rights that we probably need to. So that's more of a statement.
Might I respond to that, Madam Chair?
Yes, you're recognized.
So the broad language is taken from court decisions that discuss parental rights, and a lot of them, the earliest cases, have to do with the government taking people's children. Then later on has to do with the right to educate your child the way you see fit, and like I said, there was another spurt of activity with grandparent visitation laws. But the wording has remained consistent from the U.S. Supreme Court and state Supreme Courts for over 100 years. So that's the broad language. There is a little bit more filling in of the lines, I guess you could say, with the enumerated list, but it by no means is it exhaustive, or does it intend to be exhaustive to say this is a list of every single right that a parent could claim under this statute or under the principles that have been used to defend parents' rights in the last century. But it does provide a nice framework to say this is what is clearly the public policy of Tennessee, what we support parents' rights to do in our state.
Any other questions? Representative Carrier, recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to review, as you've been discussing this particular piece of legislation, I got kind of several questions. First of all, the Parent Code of Conduct or Family Rights and Responsibility Act, that sounds fabulous. We all want to be able to be free of any government interference on how we raise our children. So I think the concept is certainly admirable, and I appreciate your organization doing that. But there's several parts of this legislation that I'm not really even sure what it means. Okay, but before I get to that, can you tell me a specific incident in Tennessee that you're aware of where either the government entity or a healthcare provider that you're opening up a direct action against under this bill? So it's not just codifying what's already there. I mean, we've got some actions here that a healthcare provider can lose their license. You can have a direct civil action against them. There's a lot of things in here that's creating causes of action that's not particularly just out there right now. So to broaden the ability to sue, what has happened right now in the state as an example to a parent that you know or that we may know that this has happened to, that there's a real example out there that's saying either the government in their form of making sure we protect parents and protect children, or there's an entity out there that's violating someone's rights right now to parent their own children?
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, as I said, ADF represents parents across the country where this has been the case, where mainly school employees have violated the rights of parents. Personally, I grew up in Shelby County and spent most of my life there. I have personal knowledge of non-public instances where this has happened as well, where a teacher has said, I'm going to talk to your parent in the next few days. Should I be using your given name or the name you've told me? Which pronouns? What should we be talking about? Are there topics of a conversation that I should or should not cover with your parents? That's the type of thing that a parental rights law that's clear and sets clear standards would address. Not only because it would open up a right to sue the school district for either having a policy that allows for that or not stopping their employee from doing something like that, but also because it reminds the government employees what their role is and what rights parents do have, so that as they interact with other people's children, they don't assume responsibility that they haven't been given.
Thank you. So just for instance, and I'm going to be very simplistic, I'm not going to get into the pronoun argument, but if my son is named Jackson and a teacher wants to call him John and that offends me because they're not calling him by his given name, your legislation would give rise to me suing that teacher directly, personally, in her personal capacity or their personal capacity for violating the given name that I've given my son or daughter. Is that the intent of a parent code of conduct, where if something simple like that, where his name's Jackson, but they won't call him Jackson, they'll call him John, that I can sue that teacher or that entity or that person directly? Is this what the intent of this legislation provides?
You're recognized.
I would say under those set of facts, no, that's not what this intends. And the legislation as written doesn't decide, well, a parent's unreasonable claim will win in court, or the government's claim will win in court. It simply sets clear standards. So the parent would have to articulate what right they're looking for. I want my son to be called Jackson rather than John. The court would evaluate whether that's a reasonable claim under the standards of the law, and then people would present proof, obviously. But I think that that seems like a rather minor topic, but that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with government entities, agencies, institutions that actively hide or otherwise lie to parents about their children, and meaningful things. Not, here's what I'm calling your son or daughter, but is your son a daughter? And those are things that parents shouldn't be left out of, and those are issues that give rise to legislation that protects parents' rights.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I think you somewhat proved my point. I purposely came up with a pretty simplistic example that can be captured under your piece of legislation that would give someone the right to file that action, which it's relatively minor. That's one of my concerns with the way this has been drafted. And I'm going to quote a sentence under 36.8.104, where you provide certain rules should be followed, and you're providing the judges certain instances, either one at the trial court level, or if and when this is ever challenged, what they're supposed to do as it relates to analyzing the constitutionality of this particular piece of legislation. In number 3, it says if a child has no affirmative right of access to particular surgical, medical, or mental health procedure or service, then this act does not grant that child's parent an affirmative right of access to that procedure or service on that child's behalf. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know what that says. I don't know what an affirmative right of access to a particular surgical, medical, or mental health procedure for the right of access for a child. So you've got some strict ways to enforce this or follow the rules, but yet the words that are written here are very hard to determine what the legislation does. Do you see that as being a problem with this, or is that something where I'm just not reading into the language? And it's throughout the language. So I want to make sure that if we're going to get a parent right of or a parent code of conduct, or how you've named this piece of legislation, that it can withhold some issues if it's ever challenged. Do you see that paragraph and can kind of explain to me what that means?
You're recognized.
Sure, there are plenty of things that the state of Tennessee has said are off limits for children, whether it's alcoholic beverages, lobotomies, tattoos, or as a concrete example, what this body passed into law last year is a transition procedure, or hormone blockers or wrong sex hormones given to minor children. Well, there are arguments out there that parental rights, the right to direct your child's care, would open up that avenue to say my right as a parent trumps the government's responsibility to protect children from harm done through experimental, dangerous, harmful medicine. This makes clear that that's not what this legislation does, and it says in Tennessee not only is there a limit to parental rights, but the government's reasonable regulation of medicine doesn't even impact parental rights. That's what that language says.
Those are all my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I think DCS wanted to test. We can go back into session if you want to. We're back in session. You're recognized.
Madam Chair,
Okay, so can you hear me? Oops, everybody's blocked out here. I'm going to assume you can hear me. Unmute. All All right, so you can hear me. Okay, good. All right, so this was a little experience I had last year, and I wanted you to, like I said, immerse yourself in it and just see everything that happened there. A few things I want to point out, particularly some of the things I told you today. Both. So I talked about Family Forward Project, and Mr. Carpenter talked about ADF. And one of the first things that he said is, I'm with Alliance for Defending Freedom, and we're the largest organization in the United States protecting the rights of parents, right? So he threw out his influence first so that he could get their attention. He was also asked the question about other states, and as I talked about earlier here today, there's a part of the dynamic discussion is, well, our state does this, other states do that, etc. I will tell you specifically that I looked up his claim that 17 other states had similar laws, and they do not. So that was not a true statement. But that was what he used to influence. That was the other thing he used. He also talked about the fix the problem. So, as I was talking about earlier today, you want to talk about how your legislation fixes the problem. It's very interesting if you listen to him very closely, and this is probably the third time I've heard it, and every time I hear it a little bit differently. But he basically says that there are already constitutional protections out there between parents and children, but we just want to make it a law. And as you heard at the very end of it, the reason ADF wanted to make it a law is because they are a law firm, and they want the lawsuits that will be able to be generated, because this particular bill did create the ability for them to sue. So, my mother, God rest her soul, used to love to say the word back-ass words, right? Like, I think this is a little bit back-ass words, but that's a little bit about how I felt about this legislation and even this discussion. But I, again, just wanted you to be immersed in it, you to see what it's like, envision yourself talking about a particular law that you believe needs to be passed and how to prepare yourself to do that.
With y'all
Oops.
today.
Let me go on. All right, so this is the end for today. I'm going to stop recording here for a minute and we can have a little bit of discussion, but this is time to get going. This is time to sit and think about, okay, I want to help. I want to help at the state legislative. And don't think that that means as 2025 pops around the corner to us that you have to, put on your little lobbyist hat and go marching down there right away. It's going to, of course, for many of you, take some time to be prepared. Start now getting to know who your legislators are so that we can develop a particular legislative group that we have discussions and forums about what are the bills that we want. I mean, we know in particular we want to get rid of anonymous reporting. We want to get rid of mandatory reporting. Some of these are going to require some adjustments at the federal level. We want to get rid of ex parte orders. We want parents to have competent attorneys. We want parents to get all their discoveries. We don't want children removed on ex parte. Okay. So those are the type of the things that we want to happen. The message is loud and clear across to every state. And so it's time for you to jump on board and to be part of it.